Hey, Jennifer, how are you? You're muted. Hey, Lynette.
Good morning, Kathy.
Good morning. Good morning, Jennifer. How are you?
Morning. Fine. How are you?
I am good.
I owe you some pictures from Yellowstone and Grand Teton.
Oh, it was a good trip.
It was a good trip, but I will say I learned I don't know. I need to go with photographers
Yes.
that just want to and I did when the second group came, they wanted to, but it seemed like they wanted to rush. And I'm like, we've got to sit here for a moment, right? Yeah, my husband was kind of joking. I think we need to go on our next vacation by ourselves or something, because we went to Alaska with them and we saw nothing. And then we went to Yellowstone and okay, we got our fill of buffalo. After the 4 buffalo style, I was like, okay, I'm done. Can we cue the muses,
Yeah.
For some reason, though, we were in the wrong place for the wildlife or something. I don't know. But everybody else was I'm like, okay, where are y'all?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was good though. It was good. The timing for Grand Teton wasn't the best. If it was during the hole when they were looking for Gabby.
Yeah.
So as I was walking the trails, I'm like, please don't be.
Yeah.
But it was absolutely gorgeous.
Very good. Well, Lynette just got back from Costa Rica with me. And so she got to travel at the photographer's pace, which is 4 hours in the same location.
And I loved every minute of it. But, I love Yellowstone too. Harvey's favorite park. And we've been there twice. So I think we will always go back if given a chance. Grand Teton is awesome. Wow.
Oh, yes. And we went during kind of off season. So it was right after the big rush and then everybody's starting school. And then right before their winter rush. So we were in that little bitty window, which I thought maybe that's what made waiting for the restaurants a long time, but they're like, no, we just don't have any help. But so we had that little 2-week window before they shut down for a week for a break. And then, so it was good. The weather, you couldn't have asked for better weather. It was nice and cool in the morning, totally blue. I mean, I shouldn't have had an issue with photography based on lighting. We'll just put it that way.
That's good. That's good.
Seeing wildlife in Yellowstone, though, we had to get up really early because that's when the animals are active. We saw a bear, we saw, things like that. But we had to get up early. We were out by 6 o'clock like the birders do, Kathy.
Yeah. Before dawn.
Our goal was to get out by 5:30. Before our friends came, we were out at 5:30. After that, it was like 6:30. And I'm like, okay, guys, we're missing it.
Yeah.
But it's fine. It is what it is.
Exactly. And you took the R5?
I took the R5 and the R6.
Good. And they functioned
because I wanted to have both lenses on. Of course, for the mountain goat, it was like, okay, yeah, I didn't have that lens. I needed like the 800.
Oh, yes. They're so far away.
Yes. And then our friend, Kenny Jones, he permanently lives there and does photography tours and things like that. And he has like this telescope looking thing. And I mean, it was phenomenal, but of course my iPhone didn't fit on his little adapter and my, so it's like, it's okay. I saw them, check. I mean, it would have been awesome. And then we saw
spotting scope from the birding world. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we did see one grizzly. Didn't find 399 or whatever her number is. Didn't find her with all her little cubs. And then one moose as we're leaving the from one side of the water at the Grand Tetons to go back to the other side. We were on that little ferry boat thing. And we're looking at the moose and he sped up and all of us are like, wait, no, slow down. Why are you speeding up? But it was good. Bald eagle. And of course, right as I looked down is when it decided to take off. And I'm like, "Oh, I've been sitting here for, so that was on me. That was my bad.
So many lessons learned on trips like that.
Yes. Yes.
Reasons to go back.
Yes.
Yes, it is definitely a go back. And then on the way back, we stopped at Garden of the Gods. And so we did a little kind of, since we were pulling the fifth wheel, we had to take our time. There was no, there was no rush to get there or rush to get back. So it was good.
That's good. Lynette, how are you doing on processing your Costa Rica photos?
Very slow with Thanksgiving and all, preparing food. We had company and stuff. The best I could do was a few. And I did a few while we were in Costa Rica. So at night I will sit up a little bit to do a little, some processing. But boy, there's so many photos.
There's so many. And that's what I'm doing is I'm just processing, an hour at a time at night and just sit there and, it'll take a while. Hey, Carrie, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Welcome. Did you have a good holiday?
I did. Yeah, it was really nice. It was kind of like my first American Thanksgiving. So
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
I'm full of turkey.
So you got to experience the American Thanksgiving.
I did. Yeah. It was nice. It was really fun. We had all of our other expat friends together. So
That's good. That's good. Because Canada has a Thanksgiving too, right?
we do, but it's in October, so our harvest is earlier.
Yeah.
It's the same premise. It's just not as extravagant. So it was really fun to kind of go all out.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, we've got one more person coming, so Marie should be coming in any moment now.
Well, I do have to apologize. I'll have to step away every so often. I have some furniture being delivered from Canada. So it's we're kind of coming and going. So I may be muted to make sure that I'm not interrupting, or
Sure, that's
I might have
fine.
to step away and check off boxes. So.
And I have already started the recording because I forgot to record class the other day. And so I have already started the recording. So I'll share that with you all when we're finished.
Thank you.
You were talking about R5, Kathy. There's nothing to be had.
Oh, there's nothing to be had. Yeah.
Canon doesn't have any, B&H doesn't have any, Houston Camera Exchange doesn't have any. So.
Now, Darla from Costa Rica bought hers from Canon Refurbished, and she got to save a couple of $100. So check Canon Refurbished. And it's just the
I looked, but you know what? It's 3,500 versus 3,800. Yeah, I guess you know.
Yeah, or you could always get the R6, of course.
I'm not in a hurry, Kathy, so I'll just wait. I'll wait it out.
Okay. Hey, Marie, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I am good. I am good. Okay, so I have already started recording, and some of you probably know each other from other trips. I mean, not trips, but from other classes. And so welcome to this one. This is a new class in street photography, and putting it together, it was amazing to me how much information I have to share with you. So, hopefully I'll get you out of here in an hour, but it depends also on what kind of questions you all have. So class is being recorded. I remembered to turn on the recording this time. And let's talk a little bit about street photography. Have you all been out on the streets? Have you been photographing on the streets?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I can't say I have unless I'm out on vacation, then I will. There are things that would attract my eyes, and then I would, but I'm just taking, I don't have any concept of, I like this door, I like the paintings and wall in Portugal and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's street photography. That's what it's all about. So the beauty of street photography is that we are out in urban environments as opposed to where traditionally I'm in a natural environment, but we're out in urban environments and we're catching bits and pieces of everyday life. You know, that we're seeing history and places where there might be history going on. We're seeing things like, you know, the everyday life of a little boy coming out in his brand new shoes to sit on the stoop and watch the world go by. Things that happen everywhere in the world. The beautiful thing about street photography also is that you can put all kinds of techniques to use. So you can take pictures and process them in different ways. You can do all kinds of manner of illustrating public art that we've got all over the place. And then you can take all these different skills that we learn in different places and put them all together into one sort of package. So it's a type of photography that allows you to use any of the skills you might have and skills you might learn as time goes on in photography. You know, like we were talking the other day in class about motion blurs and getting motion blurs in intentional camera movement class. You can put that to use in your street photography. And for me, the beautiful thing about street photography is that I can do this with my friends. This is something that we can share together as long as they're photographer friends. Jennifer was just talking about going on vacation with and trying to travel with non-photographer friends, but I think there's nothing more fun than traveling the streets with a group of other photographers. And so it creates a lot of fun and a lot of energy, and it is something that you can do anywhere in the world, which is also very fun. Equipment needs. I polled a bunch of people that have traveled with me and asked them, okay, so once we got back home, did you think that the lens you used was the right lens? And this is always the question whenever we're traveling together on workshops or really whatever we might be doing. But the ideal street photography lens kind of boils down to, if you're using a full sensor camera, it's the 24-105. Some people like the 24-70, Canon, Nikon, everybody makes one of these, but it tends to be the 24-105. And the 24-105 simply because that means that we can zoom out to about street width, but we can zoom in to do people's hands or people's faces. So that 24-105 on a full sensor camera tends to be the most ideal. If you have a crop sensor camera, and Carrie, I think, has a crop sensor camera. Marie, which one are you using?
The 7D, the cropped.
The 7D, so you're cropped too. So that would be your 15-85. That has the same equivalent of the 15-85.
Kathy, what's the difference between the 16-35 and the 18-85? Because you say when the streets aren't crowded. So I was a little, because I think I bought something a little too big.
So
actually.
The 16-35, let me talk about 70-200 first of all.
Okay, yes.
70-200 is more the lens if you're going out for details. So, you know, it's about that 70 millimeters. It still zooms to that 105 millimeters, of course, but then it has a little bit more reach to it. But your question, Marie, on the 16-35 is that most of the time that is too wide. And as a result, you're getting a lot of pedestrians or other photographers along the edge of your photograph. That would be the 12-24 if you were using Carrie's Canon Rebel. But the 16-35 is too much for during the day. If we're going out and we're doing nighttime photography, then and the streets are not as crowded, then the 16-35 works really well. Early morning photography when the streets aren't real crowded, the 16-35 works well. but the 35 is just a little too wide for zooming in on people's hands, or as you see down the bottom left of this one, zooming in on details in a window display. So the 16 to 35 is just a little too wide. I use this one, the 16 to 35, or that would be the 12 to 24 or the 10 to 22 if you're using a crop sensor camera. This is the lens we would use if we were going out early in the morning. And this usually has a beautiful starburst, that's 16 to 35. So that gives us a really nice starburst. So during the day, middle picture that you see there, I'm using my 24 to 105. So that's kind of my favorite lens to use to walk around.
Okay. I did what every beginner photographer does wrong, which is like I went out and bought lenses and then they were the wrong ones.
Well, and that's very true. And a lot of people do that. Just remember that every lens can be resold to somebody. And
That's
every
right.
lens, it may not be that it's a wrong lens, but it might turn out that what you're using it for is the wrong lens. A lens is a tool. So just like a wrench or a hammer or a socket wrench is a tool, you don't need every tool that's available at the hardware store. You need certain tools for certain things. So think of lenses in that respect. And your lenses, you can always sell them to somebody. Yeah, don't let them sit in a closet somewhere.
Right. That's where they are right now.
Yes. So street photography, let's go back to the previous shot for this so you can just watch some people having fun on the street. Street photography can be intimidating. It is not for the faint of heart. It can be scary to be out there, and especially if you're out there by yourself. That's why I like going with a group of friends or a group of other people who are either photographer friends or just plain old ordinary friends. I like having somebody to watch my back so that I can concentrate on my photography. So even if it's just a fellow friend, not necessarily a photographer, I do like to photograph with other people on the street because it can be pretty intimidating. You also do have to be very careful, not only trips and falls and that type of stuff, but you have to be very careful of people lurking, people noticing, people possibly wanting to, steal your equipment or that type of thing. And so I do encourage you to be very careful. Another reason that it's nice to have a group of 8 friends around you, or when we do street photography in foreign countries, we always have 1 or 2 guides with us. And in Morocco, where it gets a little crazy sometimes on the streets, we do end up having a couple of men that travel with us in local dress, and they're just watching out for people. And so it's nice to have a group with you. I do like sometimes photographing on the street by myself, but I'll admit that I do get pretty intimidated pretty fast because my antenna goes up to tell me that I'm not safe. And then I don't feel like I can concentrate on photography when I don't feel like I'm safe. A man probably would not have that same situation, but me as a female with a camera, sometimes I do feel that way. It doesn't show it in this picture, but I always wear my camera across my body when I'm on the street. And the same thing for my camera bag. I wear it across my body. Or if I'm doing a backpack, I keep my backpack in the front of my body as opposed to in behind my body. I travel very light in the street. I don't take all my equipment with me, and rarely do I have any more than 1 lens with me, only if I know that we're going to switch later on. But so I tend to travel very, very light if I have to. Also watch out for leaving your car initially in a parking area. Jennifer, were you with us the night we got broken into? No? Okay. So be careful of where you park your car and people seeing you get out of your car and putting your camera bag into the trunk or into the back of the car. We had 9 cars broken into one night doing a street photography workshop. And it was simply because we were too obvious on getting out of our car and putting all of our stuff in the back of the car. So be careful about what you're doing as well. Many times I'll put my stuff in the back of the car before I get to my parking location. And then if my stuff is hidden in my car, which I don't do anymore, then I'll make sure that it's hidden pretty well and I don't make a big production of getting out of my car in any location or in, a public vehicle or that type of stuff. So it can be intimidating. So if you feel a little intimidated with street photography, don't worry about it. That's just the way it is, especially I think if we're a female with this. So let's get into it. Any questions before I leave safety and that type of thing? No, and I think Lynette, you're coming up here to the Woodlands to do Christmas lights with me in a week or so, aren't you? Yeah, you're muted, so I can't hear you, but I saw your lips move.
Trouble with my Wi-Fi, so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
I can hear you though.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So to do basic street photography, let's just get buried in the basic stuff. Architectural details, for instance. So it's nice to photograph just the basic architecture that's out on a street. The basic architecture, even if it's new against old. I love new against old when I'm out on the street. I love modern against ancient when I'm out on the street. So that juxtaposition is always a lot of fun to do. But just getting involved in architectural details, the wonderful things we might see, carvings we might see under a balcony, or even the interior of some sort of a spiral staircase going up. I love getting involved in the architectural details. So what this means is we're not photographing people. We're just photographing, whatever might be on the street, just basic old ordinary architectural details, photographing the buildings, looking up and doing the reflections of the buildings against each other. These are always fun street photography things to do. And they're usually not intimidating. They don't attract a lot of attention. There's nothing unusual about a photographer photographing architectural details on a street. And so it makes it kind of fun, so we're just looking for those patterns and shapes and colors against each other. And then we can also focus on small details. So once again, we're not making a big production about us photographing out on the street. So we're just looking at very small details, the reflection showing up in a puddle, just a very small detail. And most people would not notice what we're photographing. We're not going to draw a lot of attention to ourselves. And I find that this is always a good thing to do when we're doing street photography, is that we're just not attracting a lot of attention to what we're doing. I like doing small details. So, something like this cash register in Cuba, where it's, set for pesos and centavos. I ended up looking it up when I got back home and found out that it was something like a 1906 cash register, not still being used, but just as an architectural detail. So sometimes when we're photographing those little tiny things, notice I've blurred out the background. So I've used that f-stop of a 5.6 or a 4.5 to blur out that background. And small detail here, a lady's toes that are painted traveling companion with the Cuban flag on them, small details. So these are the things that as we're photographing them, we're not really drawing a lot of attention on us. So it makes it an interesting thing just to kind of slip around. Flowers on the side of the street. So just, street photography where we're just concentrating on those flowers that are blooming in different places. But then at the same time, I'm on the street. And then, if you're traveling, you can get these as small little vignettes of whatever area you happen to be traveling through. Things like bicycles up against walls and chained to different places. And even those small architectural details that we see around the different city streets, use that shallow f-stop, 4.5 or even a 3.5 here. And it applies to wherever we might be. Here it is in one country on one street, and here it is in another country on another street. So you learn these little tiny details and these little tiny techniques, and now we can apply them anytime that we're out doing street photography. I love markets. And the other day I was at the farmers market in downtown Houston, and it was just a wonderful hour and a half of photography. So markets in any of the countries that we might go to on the street, these are great places because most people don't have any problem with us walking around and photographing the market. It's a good travel shot to bring back home, but it's also a wonderful free opportunity to do street photography. And this is where I also, to blend in, I will try, even if I have to use hand signals, to talk to the local vendors. I buy. So I will buy a couple of plums. I will buy an apple. I will buy a couple of things. And then I'm walking around eating them, hoping obviously I don't get intestinal distress. But, if I am behaving like a regular old ordinary person at the market, then most people don't pay any attention to me having a camera. Some vendors, if you're blocking their stand, don't like you to be there because you're blocking their area and they have to make money. And so I'm usually trying to stay off to the side or to stay to the side, off to a different area. So it's those tiny little details that we find along the street, just slipping in, and I'll talking about going in places in a little bit, but it's those tiny little details that we find along the street. And it's amazing how many vignettes like this one have already been arranged for us. We don't have to arrange them. They've already been set up by somebody who has a good eye for these things. We just have to find them. And so even if it means that we're kneeling down and photographing these flowers, what I'm really photographing is the street and the ladies on the street. So it looks like I'm photographing the flowers, but really what I'm photographing is the menu board, and I'm photographing the street detail. So it looks like I'm photographing one thing, but I'm really photographing something totally different. And then let's face it, there is a lot of grit and grime out there on our streets. And some of the streets are more gritty and grimier than other streets. But that grit and grime is the way things are right now. So for instance, in Positano, Italy, this graffiti artist had his work all over town. And so as I walked around town, I started noticing it was the exact same graffiti artist. And so I started featuring his graffiti art, found out who he was when I got home and looked it up. And I started featuring his graffiti art in the photos that I was taking in that town, in that area. Remember, as we were talking the other day, or some of you all in the intentional camera movement class, where we use that blurring motion to show movement. So this is nothing different than just me standing back, setting my camera shutter speed to like a 45th of a second or a 15th of a second, something that I can hand-holding, focusing on the graffiti, and then letting the people as they walk through blur. So simple intentional camera movement technique and placed into doing graffiti art. So placing that graffiti that's done by the same artist and turning these into a series of pictures. So it ends up not being just piecemeal graffiti, but it ends up being somewhat of a series. But that grit and that grime, that crowdedness of the streets is something that we should photograph, we should celebrate, because it is what's attracting us to being out on those streets. And some streets, whoops. There we go. So seeing that activity, and this is one where it's just a grab shot. Camera comes up, photographs that camera goes down. And unfortunately, my shutter movement was too low. But I like it because I think the blurriness of it just adds to the photograph. And whether other people do or not, I just, it's just that playing around with that camera movement. But that graffiti in itself can become, as it is its own artwork, it can become your photography artwork as well. So where I used to resent graffiti and think of it as nasty dirt, I've gotten to where I'm just kind of embracing it because it is there. And, some of it's more exciting than others, but it is there. And it does show us the city and where we are. And so street art, to me, this is another way that we can disappear. I can sit there and photograph that wall all day long and nobody really notices me. Nobody really pays any attention to me. So it's a way that I can kind of, in a way, slip into the city and not have anybody really pay attention to what I'm doing. So that graffiti, embrace it. And that graffiti goes along with embracing the energy of the city. So in this shot right here, you see how crowded the streets are. This is in Naples, and one of the most gritty cities that I've been in by myself in a long time. But it helped to step back and get out of the crowd for a while. And when I stepped back, I thought, okay, so we've got this cool technique I can play with, that slow shutter speed. So 45th or 50th of a second, maybe even going down to 35th of a second, whatever you can handhold, 24 to 105 millimeter lens. So I can usually handhold that at a little bit around 24th of a second shutter speed. So usually the rule of thumb is the millimeters of the lens equals how slow you can hold your shutter speed. So I can hold my shutter speed for about a 20th of a second, depends on you and how your hands move. But in that case, that street movement going by blurs, but then my graffiti wall stays solid and the street across from it stays solid. So I can now slip into this doorway and photograph for the next, 5 or 10 minutes as the street goes by. And then notice what I've done with my processing. The street is black and white, but the graffiti wall is color. So this type of photography just allows for a lot of creativity, as opposed to something more straightforward that we might do like a bird or an elk or something like that. The street photography yields itself to a lot of different creative elements. So that grittiness of the street, go ahead and embrace it. Show it for what it is. In my opinion, it just adds color to the street. And then that grittiness of the crowdedness of the streets and the narrowness of the streets and the layers of the streets, that's street photography to me. And just being able to find that and see that and illustrate that, because sometimes it's totally chaotic. And so being able to manage that chaos is what makes street photography a challenge. Questions about that, the grittiness of the street?
Kathy.
Yes.
Like you had the graffiti on one side and blurred people with the black and white. Where do you put your focus when you're taking that?
So the focus is over on the graffiti wall.
Okay.
So my focus point is over on the left side.
Okay.
And then just waiting for those people to move on by.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions? Grittiness of the street. And you notice in that case with that previous photograph, I'm backed up off the street trying to be as incognito as I can. I'm not trying to bring it to those people's attention that I'm photographing them. So I'm just trying to be a fly on the wall, which helps many times when you're out photographing. And then there are a lot of people on the streets to photograph. And I am not a people photographer. I get very nervous about photographing people. Some of you are going to be much, much better at it than others. But I tend to photograph people who are making a spectacle of themselves anyway. So if somebody is sitting there like this gentleman in Cuba, and he's got his cap next to him, he's obviously taking pennies or whatever for letting us photograph him. He's making a spectacle of himself. He's behaving himself. And, you look into his eyes and you wonder, what he's been through in the Cuban Revolution and, what life has been like for him. But I love doing these type of people on the street. It's people who are making a spectacle of themselves. It's people who are drawing attention to themselves. The man in the seersucker suit in Cuba, once again, you just wonder what he's been through. What was the Cuban Revolution like for him? And, he's out with his morning newspaper and having his coffee and his seersucker suit, who's obviously seen better days. And then the lady is just one of those street performers. So people who are out on the street and drawing attention to themselves, I have always found that people in the religious orders are almost always willing to pose for you, that you can always just say, brother, would you mind standing for me in front of the church? And I've always found that people in the religious orders were more than welcome to stand and pose for me. If you just simply, say something nice and kind. And if it helps to learn in the country that you're traveling to, how to say, may I take your photo? It's kind of a nice, courteous thing to be able to say. And sometimes you strike up conversations. This is Rosa, who was 90 years old. And I have no idea why Rosa decided to start talking to me, but Rosa decided to start talking to me one day in Spanish. And I communicated back as best I could. And then Rosa tells me that she's 91 years old. And, everything led to everything else. And then eventually I'm photographing Rosa. So sometimes you just find people who want to talk to somebody. And, if that's okay, if that's what you're into, and your individual personality is going to attract some people. But when you find somebody who's, matching whatever outfit and you say something to them and you draw it to their attention, it's amazing how many people will just let us photograph them. They'll get into the energy of it, and we get into the energy of it. And then there's street performers all over the place. So if they've got their guitar case out there or whatever, and they've got whatever going on and they're being public, well, they're free to photograph. They are making a public spectacle of themselves. And the little dog just happened to like the music, and that made the photo even more special because the little dog happened to like the music. But those people who are out on the streets, who are performing or making a spectacle of themselves, in my opinion, these are free to photograph. They're interacting with us. Public dance troupe on a Saturday in the plaza, we can photograph these people because they're out, they're in public, they know they're in public. And so these are the type of photographs we can take without having to have a model's release. But these musicians on the side of the street, these are always great characters to photograph. And then, you slip a couple of dollars in their guitar case because they let you photograph them. And at the same time, you get to listen to some great music. These are my type of people that I like to photograph on the street, as opposed to, I am not one who puts my camera in the face of a homeless person. It's just not me. This is not what I like to do. So I tend to like more the people who are making a public spectacle of themselves anyway. In the markets and that type of stuff, you'll get vendors who are willing to, they're dressed in interesting costumes, or they're dressed in traditional dress. So these are my type of people, and the people that I really like to photograph out on the street. Sometimes if they let me, I'll get right in their face. This guy always reminded me of the gnome that hides under the bridge, that, all those fairy tales that told us about the gnome under the bridge. This is definitely a gnome. Definitely one of those that lives under the bridge. But, I like being more around these type of spectacle people. And before I leave that, each one of you has your own energy. It is amazing how people interact with other people on the street, other total strangers. You've just met them 3 seconds, and some people are just immediately friendly with people, and some people are just immediately taken with other people. I had one lady who traveled with us for 10 days on one of the trips, and she had things thrown at her regularly. So in the market, she got hit twice on different occasions as we were walking through the market. And she would have people tell her no, that they couldn't photograph her. And I would turn around and suddenly she's in an altercation with somebody. I think she had bad juju. You know, there was something that was coming out. I didn't particularly like her either, but you know, but some people have that magnetism, and that might be you, and some people aren't. And so I remember this lady saying, nobody wants to have their picture taken on the street. And I thought, well, that's interesting because I haven't encountered that. But yet I'm also one of those people who I'm not going to just walk up to people and start talking to them. I'm more reserved, where other people, you know, have never met a stranger in their entire lives. So people photography on the street is very much your personality and how you interact with people. And some people do it in one way and some people do it in another way. I kind of hold back just a little bit more reserved. How are you with people on the street?
I'm reserved.
You're reserved, yeah.
Yes. I'll probably tend to take more architecture and paintings on the walls and doors and knobs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And alleys.
Yeah.
And
Marie, Jennifer?
Of the alleys.
Yeah.
It seems like the areas that I like in Houston that have all the neat murals and all of that are in the not so best part of town. And so my son, that's the police officer, is like, okay, you could only go between this hour and this hour because everybody's asleep.
Yeah.
So therefore I don't see, you know, very many people during that time. But I also like when you're in downtown and you do have, you know, I kind of, for some reason, I'm kind of curious about the homeless, you know, how did you get there? That kind of, you know, thing. Some I'll talk to, you know, if they're not, but some do scare me. But so it's kind of a mixture of both, I guess.
Marie, how are you?
Well, being in the city, right? New York City, the homeless do scare me a bit. And so I have tried from across the street, but I prefer asking somebody who's like, I was on top of the Met, and a woman walked in with this, what do they call them? The boas around the neck. And she was obviously looking for attention.
Yes.
And so I photographed her. And and her friend was in an all leopard outfit. I photographed them, but I complimented the scarf first. And that seemed to be my way in.
Yes.
Because then she wanted to talk to me.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with it. I'm a little reserved though. I get intimidated. I was always like that though. That's, you know, but I do ask politely. And if they say no, I walk away.
Yeah. Or if they appear, you know, if they appear too scary, you know, I'll walk away.
Oh yeah, I'm gone.
But you know, you just have to play it. You know, Marie, you just mentioned something. I don't know how many people around the world that, you know, they're wearing something interesting. And I will just say, like, there was a guy who had on a blue fedora one time in a bar, and he was just, you know, in the outside bar, and he was just a dandy. And, you know, I just looked at him and smiled, and he said, sure, it was okay to photograph him, you know, but sometimes if you just bring it to the attention, you know, he loved his hat as much as I did. So sometimes that it just helps.
You know what else I've done? I always offer to send them the picture.
Yeah.
I said, if you give me your email address, I will email this when I get home.
Yeah. And go ahead, Jennifer.
Do you find a difference? Or I seem to notice that when we lived in Europe, it was a little bit easier than it is here. Have you found that?
It kind of, you know, I think because people in Europe live so much on the street, they're out you know, they go out to dinner in the evening and they promenade, and, you know, and we don't do that as much here. So I find that people in those areas where they are going out to socialize and going out to visit are a little bit more open. Yeah.
Okay.
So when you see things, ask yourself if your viewer is going to see this, because we get on the street and we get caught up in, oh my gosh, look at that. There's that dog in that window. Now, do you have the lens that can create the photo that you're looking for? Do all the elements pull together? And so sometimes when we're out on the street, we see elements, but we need to ask ourselves if our viewer is going to see the same thing, if our viewer is going to appreciate what we saw, or is it going to turn into a photograph that we find interesting? So many times when you're looking through your viewfinder, ask yourself if you're telling the story and if you're pulling all the elements together, and is my viewer going to be able to see what I'm trying to say? Because both of these pictures, they sort of have elements, but in my opinion, they don't really pull everything all together. And so be aware of pulling all of your elements together. And one of the ways you can pull your elements together is through colors. So when you're out on the street, noticing colors against each other. Now, I pulled this little icon off of my Mac because it illustrates the color wheel very well. And it's simply that red and green go really, really well together. You know that the Christmas colors, blue and yellow, or purple and yellow go very well together. But also any of these colors like blue and gold and lavender and lime green. So if you think about what's across from each other on the color wheel, and I've given that to you on your handout, if you think about when we see primary colors together, reds, yellows, or blues. So primary colors, red, yellow, or blue. The complementary colors are the red and cyan, the green and magenta, the blue and yellow, or traditional red and green, yellow and purple, orange and blue. These are the colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. And then the secondary colors are what happens when we blend colors together. So red and yellow make orange. So if you're tuned in to seeing those colors next to each other, then you're tuned in to what color I need to put into this picture to make things harmonious. So I saw that purple olives, the purple awning. And so that just tells me I need the perfect man or woman in a jalaba to walk right by here. So from there on, I just compose the shot, turn it vertical, put the focus point on the purple olives, and I'm just waiting for the right person to walk through the picture. That's all I'm doing. And, you know, if I don't care if it's going to take 50 people for me to get to walk through there on a crowded street, no telling who's going to walk through there. But the right color harmony is going to make that photo. So when we see that blue and yellow together, there's a picture there. We just have to find it. So we see that blue and yellow. This means this is going to look a whole lot better than if there was a other color of drapery in that window. So when we see those colors together, blue and yellow once again, we see those colors together, whatever they might be, this is when we should stop and realize that there's a photo here. We just need to figure out how to put that photo here. Same street, even during the day, I've got those yellows and those pinks next to that blue. This is in color harmony with each other. And so we put those colors together and we know that we've got a photo. So same street in Sicily, the one over on the left-hand side is a straight image, and the one on the right side is an HDR. Have any of you all done HDR, or do you know about it? Have I taught you about HDR in another class, high dynamic range?
New to me.
No? Okay. So HDR is where we take 5 exposures, 2 stops underexposed, 1 stop underexposed, 1 stop properly exposed, 1 stop overexposed, 2 stops overexposed. And then we use HDR software to blend them together. And what we're trying to do is in a not busy, but in a contrasty situation like this street scene over on the left-hand side is the natural image. We can't get the clouds to be well exposed if we're also going to get the foreground to be well exposed. Now, this is very, very different now that we have the latest processing from Adobe. We can now pull out much more dynamic range than what we used to. But it used to be that we had to do this high dynamic range and blend these images together to get the detail in the clouds plus the detail in the streets. And so just be aware that there is this technique called high dynamic range, and we can use this now to photograph in super, super contrasty situations. The R5, the RP, all of the R cameras and the mirrorless cameras, almost all of them have a HDR setting, but that blends the photos in the camera, and we don't want that. We want to blend afterwards in software. And then this is also called exposure bracketing. So Marie, on your camera, you've got exposure bracketing where you can tell it to take 5 exposures from 2 stops under to 2 stops over. And it takes, you click the button 5 times. On the mirrorless cameras, we just hold the button and it takes all the 5 immediately. And then we take those pictures later on and we blend them in software. So high dynamic range. I'll offer a class in that in January or February for you all, and nice to see you all in that class. Okay. So when we see those color harmonies, this is when we know that this scene has potential. So as we start seeing these color harmonies, a lot of domes of churches here, but as we start seeing these color harmonies together, that's when we know we've got a picture. So keep your eyes open for color harmonies next to each other. And then keep your eyes open for light as well. So with light, for me, it's the idea of those long shadows or somebody is silhouetted. So we're walking down the street doing street photography, and I see this nice looking couple, good body shapes, and they're walking and they're going into this light area along the street where their shadows are going to start becoming elongated because of the sun. And so then I went ahead and just, stopped and waited for them to get in the right position and continued to photograph. So watch that light. This was done during the middle of the day, and then I made it look like sunset. So it's not a sunset shot at all. It's a middle of the day shot. So I just used a lot of oranges and golds in processing and turned it into a sunset shot. So, but it was the light that was like I wanted to be. Those long shadows when somebody goes by a street lamp. So you'll notice that if you ever start doing this type of street lamp photography, there's one spot in the street lamp where we get elongated shadow. As the person walks up to the street lamp, they don't have an elongated shadow. When they get to the sweet spot, they have an elongated shadow. And when they start walking past it, they don't have elongated shadow anymore. So noticing that light when the person has the elongated shadow in relation to the street lamps is kind of a magic point. And then blurring people and cars. This is shutter priority, 45th or 50th of a second shutter speed. So one of the few times that I use shutter priority. So you just rotate over to shutter priority, set the shutter speed at 45th or 50th of a second, set the camera on rapid release, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shots, and keep your camera moving at exactly the same speed as the guy on the bicycle, and you'll freeze the bicycle and blur the background. Now, why 45th or 50th of a second? Because I told you so. It's already been figured out. So shutter priority, 45th or 50th of a second, move your camera at exactly the same speed as the bicycler, and you blur the background, but you freeze the bicycler. So how well it works, you never know until you try. But it's a great way if there's like a whole race of bicyclers going by. Then okay, stand where you are, set your camera to shutter priority, 45th or 50th of a second, and start doing motion pans as the bicycler goes by. That shutter speed also allows us to blur people. So you want to blur the people in the scene, then that 45th or 50th of a second, or cameras on tripod here, you can tell because we're at twilight. F22, because I have the starburst on the lights. You all know about that one already. And now let's blur the people in the scene because of that slow shutter speed. So let the people in the street blur out so that we don't notice them, or let them creatively blur. Can you tell I really liked this street? We went back to it several times, just a really cool street. And then find yourself a spot and stay there. So good background, lots of activity going on. Find yourself a spot, and then let's do the 45th or 50th of a second shutter speed and photograph the cars as they go by. Speed up the shutter speed and photograph the cars as they go by. But I've found myself a spot, and what I'm doing is I'm standing in a parking space in the middle of the street. So I'm not photographing across the street. There's a parking area in the middle of the street, and I'm just standing in a parking space. So it's a fairly safe location for me to be. But find yourself a vantage point and just stay there, or find yourself a spot. Colorful street. And then there's these street performers out there that are making a spectacle of themselves. Okay, wait for one to walk by. So you find yourself a spot and you just stay there and see what happens. Find yourself a spot. We've got a great elements in the photograph, and then wait for the people to walk through your photograph. So above the crowds, or find yourself a nice graffiti wall, stand there and photograph different people as they walk by until you get the right person to fit your photo just right, like you want it to be. Guy's got the same color as the shirt, shirts, same color as the graffiti wall. He's got really cool little red sneakers. Okay, see what happens. So find yourself a vantage point, or find yourself a spot and just stay there. And then if you can find yourself a vantage point, this allows you to get off the street a bit and then photograph down onto the street, and gives you a place to stay. These are two different visits to downtown Quito, Ecuador. And one of my favorite locations, it's kind of a walkway outside one of the big churches. So it's up above the street, but if you look down one street, you have another church down the other street. And so what you end up with is a great vantage point where you're away from the crowds, up above the crowds, don't have to deal with the crowds, but we've got some interesting elements into the photograph. So find yourself a vantage point, and it might end up being one of your favorite vantage points when you return to that location, a balcony or an overlook or something like that. Downtown Houston at Eleanor Tinsley Park, just sitting in the grass and watching the runners run by in front of the skyline of Houston in the background. So, just a place where things happen, a good private place for you to be. This is a parking garage looking out over one of the major freeways in Houston, but it's safe up there. So I can drive up there, lean my body over the parking garage with my tripod, and it's a vantage point looking out over the city as things are happening around the city. Go the other direction, same vantage point, nice and safe. Anything happens, I can get in my car and leave. So, if I get the spooks or something like that, then at least I know I'm somewhat safe. So find yourself a vantage point where you can stay and you can look out over things. And then I encourage you very much with city photography to slip into a building. When a building's open and there's not a guard there with, telling you can't go in, slip in. It's amazing what you find when you slip inside a building. So here the church doors were open on the side of the church. I didn't know what was there. Slipped in, said hi to the docent who was there, was respectful, quiet, started photographing. And after a while, the nice docent's talking to me in Italian, and I have no idea what in the world she's talking about, but we're both marveling at the artwork on the ceiling. And I'm just allowed to be. So slip inside if that door is open, be quiet, respectful. I once found myself in a historical library in Naples, Florida, and it wasn't open to the public, but somebody had left the door open. So somebody came over and said, "You're not allowed to photograph in here." And I said, "I won't use these professionally. I'm just marveling at how beautiful it is." "Oh, you like libraries?" "Yeah, I like libraries," because it was that quiet old library. So I was allowed to stay. So slip inside a door. And if it's open, slip inside, see what you find. If you can't be there, if you're not supposed to be there, then somebody will come tell you eventually. But who knows? It might end up being some magic location. Slip inside if the door is open. And this was slipping inside a door that I didn't know about. And it turns out to be this wonderful 1900s old, girders and glass that's been turned into a modern shopping mall. But if you didn't know it was there and you didn't go in the door off of the street, then you would never know what laid inside. So many times in street photography, we just have to go in the door and see what it looks like, because things inside the door many times look different than things outside the door. Turn it into black and white. Now I've got something different, so play with it. And then slip inside. Turned out to be an old prison during the communist era in Romania, and it's now been turned into a museum. So very quiet, peaceful place, slip inside the door. Sometimes you never know what you'll find when you slip inside the door. And slipping inside that door also means things like cemeteries. Slip inside the door, walk around. If you're not supposed to be there, they'll post it. If you're allowed to be there, then it turns out to be a beautiful, quiet place to do street photography. So slip inside the door. You never know what you're going to find until you slip inside that door sometimes. And then it might turn out to be something really, really interesting. So be curious about what's in there. And then I also like to be very much invisible. So in other words, not drawing a lot of attention to myself, but when you're invisible, life happens around you. And that's where it's nice to have a lens that we can zoom so we don't have to get right up in front of people. A lot of folks say that they like that 50mm lens for street photography, but that means you have to walk up to people and you have to get in their face or you have to walk back. If I'm sitting there with a zoom lens, 24-105, then people don't notice that I'm zooming in on them. And so become invisible, stand on the street, don't make a big spectacle of yourself. And then we see those things, those private little moments, to people who decide to dance to music coming out of a restaurant. Those private little moments are what makes street photography so beautiful. So just sometimes it helps with tourists to become invisible and maybe don't let them know that we're photographing them. So I like to become invisible as much as I can. So just don't let people know you're there. And invisibility happens also if you go sit and order a cup of coffee and sit and photograph through the restaurant windows. That's invisibility the same. So sometimes when it becomes too much out on the street, maybe you just sit down and order a cup of coffee by a window and photograph out of the windows. And so those windows become your eye to the street, especially if it becomes too much for you, or we've had a little bit too much activity and need the brain to quiet down just a little bit. So just go inside. And children, the reality is with children that we cannot photograph them professionally unless we have a model's release from their parents. And many times that's going to be hard. So you can do like Marie was talking about, and you can say that you can, get their email and send them a photo of the children. But if you like, I like photographing kids on the street because I think that they have a lot of personality. Just be aware that unless we have a models release, we can't use these publicly. And so whether or not you can enter them in a photo contest or that type of thing is debatable, but just be aware with children of that. And then with patterns and textures, anytime I see repeated patterns, and luckily we've got repeated patterns in architecture all over the place because architects love repeated patterns. Those repeated patterns are going to be a photograph. You just have to figure out what they are. So those beautiful repeated patterns, same repeated patterns done in a different way. So those repeated patterns. So keep your eyes open to those repeated patterns. Architects did those for a reason because they draw our eye to them. And those repeated patterns, shadows and shapes, those beautiful repeated patterns. Let your eyes linger on them. If you see them, know that there's a photograph in there somehow. And those repeated patterns, do we leave them in color or do we move them to black and white? So those repeated patterns, how much do we show or how much do we not show? Look how much you could zoom in all over the place here. You could play with lots and lots of stuff on those repeated patterns, but be aware when you see those repeated patterns that you need to stop, take notice. There's a photo here. Quit moving around, get centered, figure out where the photo is, those repeated patterns. So, I always like candles in a church, and then just, photograph them afterwards. And then those beautiful repeated patterns. But those flea markets, those arts and crafts shows, the vendors lay their stuff out with repeated patterns because it's trying to attract your attention. Well, it's trying to attract your attention, so take advantage of it as a photographer. So use it to our advantage. So showing those repeated patterns. And I also like doorways into everyday life. What's behind there? So, what's behind there? What's life look like in that apartment building behind there? They've got the door open right now. The grate might be down, but what's in there and what's life like in there? This is that isolating color, just like I did with the graffiti wall. The outside is all done in black and white, but I kept the interior in that golden color and even enhanced the golden color just a bit. So street photography is beautiful because we can pull in all of these different processing ideas, ways of looking at things. But I knew when I took this that I wanted to add just isolate that color against the black and white. What's through there? What's the private life going on through there? We can't get in there, we can't see it, but it's that little bit of looking into a private life. I love that, through an open doorway. And then frame the scene with arches and doorways. So we've got an arch, we've got a plaza, in a living space. So use that arch to frame it. Use that arch to frame that steeple on the top of the church or the belfry on the top of the church. Use the arch to frame a little scene of everyday life. Guy, checking his cell phone, obviously, just what people do today. Look at cell phones when they don't have anything else to do. Well, put him in the photo and work with it. Archway. So that arch showing everyday life, that archway showing everyday life. So out on the streets in the mornings, noticing those archways or those doorways. Use these to frame. And it's just like putting a frame around your picture on a wall. It's a frame for the picture frame. So look at those archways and those doorways as frames and take them to your advantage. And then twilight, I know several of you all have taken night photography from me. Twilight out on the street, this is always a magical time. Cameras on the tripod. You know that twilight, I gave it to you on your handout, 35 minutes after the sun officially goes down. In my area, in my latitude, is nautical twilight. Civil twilight comes first. That's not very interesting from the camera's point of view. Nautical twilight comes next for about the next 35 minutes. That's the magic blue hour, as it's now called. It's only 35 minutes in my area. It's hours when we get into northern latitudes, depending on the season of the year. But it's that 35 or 45 minutes after civil twilight when we get into nautical twilight. All you have to do is look it up to find out when nautical twilight is, wherever you might be around the world. And once again, it lasts about 35 minutes in my area, my latitude, but toward northern latitudes during the summer, we'll get nautical twilight almost all night long. So we could go out and photograph like this almost all night long in places like Northern Ireland in June and July. But this is when we get starburst on the lights. This is when we get the blurred tail lights or the blurred headlights. This is headlights as opposed to tail lights. This is where we can put that tripod up on the street in a nice vantage point and just photograph to our heart's content. This is the 16mm lens, or the 10-22 or the 12-24. This is when you bring out that wide angle lens, is for this type of photography. And I'm on a roundabout, so I can keep myself in the middle of the street and still remain safe in this location. Whoops, sorry. And once again, on a roundabout, so that I can get the cars going by me and let the cars blur. How much we let them blur is up to you and your creative photography skills. That twilight, looking through archways again, but cameras on tripod, 35, 45 minutes after the sun goes down, or in the morning, the same thing, 35 or 45 minutes before civil twilight begins, nautical twilight. That vantage point, this is the perfect time to do your twilight photography. The streets are still busy, but yet we're not right down in the thick of it. And things like lighted fountains and lighted public displays, these always look much, much better at twilight than they do in full nighttime. Figure out where you need to be in ahead of time, what your compass directions are, etc., what time you need to be there, and get yourself staked out so that you're there. And then play. Blurry boat going by, full moon coming up in the horizon, play. So this is just a bridge over one of the rivers in Sevilla, Spain. Nice, safe place to be. It's a beautiful pedestrian walkway across the bridge. It has little pullouts along the bridge so that you can, get out of the walking traffic. Figure out where you need to be well in advance. Cafes, where you want to stake yourself out, what your vantage point is going to be. This is Bucharest, Romania. So just figure out where you need to be in advance and get yourself there. Eiffel Tower, this is where I had to talk with my husband that one night we will go out and we'll have a nice dinner. And the next night I would like to go out and with my camera, my tripod, casual clothes, eat street food, and you come with me so that I can be safe. And so, you've got to make these deals sometimes with people that you're traveling with so that you can take care of and indulge your photography. And right now we've got holiday lights everywhere. So this is an ideal time to get out and photograph streets at night where the holiday displays are, because a lot of the streets are much more open right now. And there's a lot more people out right now. So this is a nice, good time to get out. Bundle up, put your camera on the tripod and go out and do some of your holiday photography. But figure out where your vantage points are. This is the Preston Street Bridge in downtown Houston, one of my favorite vantage points for doing twilight. And then once that sun has gone down even further, then it's just man-made lights after that. But we don't get that blue magic in the sky. So once it gets totally dark, our night photography becomes something totally different. Still pretty, but just not the same blue that we had before that. And then use public art as a gateway to your photographs also. So this lovely statue of two people conversing, you can play with it all different ways. And so use this public art. Once again, you're a photographer out photographing this public art. Nobody's paying attention to you at this point because you're just your regular tourist with a camera. But this public art that we've got all over the place, this is on the University of Houston out front of the library, this beautiful public art that we have everywhere yields itself to great photography. They've placed it in a specific spot for a specific reason, and the artist has lit it up in a certain way. So most of the time, these pieces of public art also yield themselves to really, really nice, interesting photography. Think about where they are, where they've been placed. The artist just didn't put them there for any rhyme or reason. There's a reason when it was there. It was positioned in a specific spot. So if you're concentrating on public art, you're not drawing attention to yourself once again. Kind of gives you something to do as a street photographer. And then panoramas are a lot of fun to do. I've taught a couple of you all how to do panoramas over the years, but the way that I do panoramas is I turn the camera vertical, zoom all the way out to the widest that I can get. And then I keep the camera directly over my toes, and I keep my toes together, camera's vertical. And now I'm going to move my body in a circle by moving my toes, but my camera is going to stay above my toes the entire time. Don't bend at the waist. If you bend at the waist, you get a U. If you do this on a tripod, you get a U. So if you keep your camera directly over your toes and just move your toes all the way in a complete circle, this is a 360-degree pano of the interior of the plaza, and overlap by about 30% with each photo. And you're doing verticals. Put these into Lightroom or Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw Bridge, and Adobe does an amazing job of this. And so you don't have to do anything. You don't have to piece anything together. You're just keeping your camera right above your toes and moving in either a small arc, or you can try to do all the way 360 degrees. Here's another one, 360 degrees. You notice the same towers at opposite ends of the photograph. And this is just making a complete turn around with my camera right over my toes and never moving the camera out from around my toes. Make sense? Yep, try it. It's a lot of fun, a lot of fun. And you can do this as 3 pictures. You can do this as 5 pictures. You can do this as 30 pictures. It doesn't matter. So even if your the lens isn't wide enough to cover a scene, do a pano of it. 3 pictures work just as well as 5 pictures as 8 pictures. So panos. And then photograph things that interest you on the street. I love cats. I'm a cat person. Photograph the things that interest you. When I see cats on the street, I photograph them. Yours might be Yorkies, or Lynette's is Border Collies. I know that. So if you've got a thing that interests you, doorknobs, door knockers, whatever. Think of this in terms of building collections, things that interest you, cars. I have one friend who photographs manhole covers from around the world. So whatever it is that interests you, build these collections. So my little cat scenes all over the world, I'm a cat person. And so these are the things that I like to photograph, and I like to play with them once I come back home. This little kitten had beautiful eyes, but it didn't turn out to be a great scene. So I just played with the eyes and turned the rest in black and white. And then rural scenes are just as good street photography. So we don't have to do street photography in big, huge, grimy cities. We can do rural photography as well. We did a walk around downtown Old Katy one year, And, you know, we've got like all these historic towns, you know, in our area, Marie, just like you've got them in your area. And the street displays are really beautiful. And you know, the storefronts look absolutely gorgeous. So we can do street photography in rural locations, just like we can do street photography in urban locations. So in Romania, it always amazes me how many horse carts they still have. Luckily, you can hear a horse cart coming for a long way, and that tells everybody, get ready, here comes a horse cart. You know, and the horses are all decorated out and that type of stuff. Tuk-tuks in Thailand. So, you know, in these rural locations, we can do street photography as well. It doesn't have to be just urban cities that we can do street photography. Amish in the Amish country of Pennsylvania, or here it is, cattle drive happened to interrupt our move down a gravel road one day in Brazil. So our street photography can be in the rural locations as well as in the city locations. But keep your eyes open all the time, all the time. Keep your eyes open. This is the beauty of going with different people, different photographers. They notice something that you don't notice. You notice something that they don't know, that they notice. And so things like our motion blurs, zooming the camera in and out on the graffiti. So just using the zoom and going in and out on the graffiti, zooming in and out on the street, going down the street, those motion blurs that I showed you the other day, zooming in and out up along a walkway. So use our different techniques that we've got to play in different locations where we are out on the street. So keep your eyes open. If you hear a race car coming down the street, then get ready for it. The race car is going to come down the street. You know, get ready for it and put your techniques into action. Play with it. So you hear a spectacle going on down the street, get ready for it. Keep your eyes and your ears open for danger, as well as for the spectacle around the corner, and be prepared for it. So keep your eyes and ears open, look for things, interesting cloud formations, and then the airplane happened to fly right in front of it. So keep your eyes and ears open. Don't close yourself off so much in your photography that you fail to keep your aware of what's going on around you. Okay, questions? Or anything that I didn't touch on?
No, I think you covered it all. I mean, it was excellent.
Good. I tried to throw lots of stuff at you.
I've been building
Beautiful
some
photos.
collections.
Go ahead, Marie.
I've been building collections and I found that interesting. I tend to also film animals and gas stations and water towers.
Mm-hmm.
I love all that kind of stuff. So my problem is I have to start putting them in Lightroom in one place.
Well, you know, also if you keyword them, then you don't necessarily have to put them in one place, because you could always just go and ask for them.
Yes, I should. I haven't done that yet. I'm going to start.
Yes. It's very important to the collection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lynette, you were going to say something?
Beautiful photos as always.
Well,
And I love going into, I always sneak into churches, and they always have, their ceilings are always, you can find some beautiful paintings.
Yeah.
And so I love those.
Yeah. 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 I love that. I love if the door's open. I love just sneaking in and seeing what's there.
And beautiful doors.
Yes. Beautiful doors. Yes. Yes. So doors, you know, that could be a whole collection, just beautiful doors.
That's the one and only collection that I actually have is doors of all the places I've traveled to.
Good.
So I'm excited to make them better.
Good. It's just building a collection, and, you know, it's a never ending building collection of doors. Yeah. And then, you know, we've got to remember too, if we don't keyword those in either Adobe Camera Raw or Bridge, if we don't keyword these things, then we can't pull all of these out 20 years from now.
Right.
You know, where are all my doors and where are all my door knockers? there's a morning show here in Houston, and I was on it several years ago. And she all of a sudden wanted to see a collection of all of my door pictures. Well, okay, luckily I have them all keyworded, so it was easy for me to pull a collection real fast.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to take the time to put that into the photo. And then also in a lot of the architecture photos that I have in my catalog, I also have looked up who the architect is, when it was built, what kind of arch. Is this a capital arch or a Corinthian arch, or those are capitals, aren't they? So I've also put in what kind of arches they are. And, you know, if we don't put that stuff in, then we don't have it later on. Other questions? Okay, well, I know I'm going to see some more of you all in textures class and night photography class, because we've got both of those going on. So I'll see you all in another class. And then hopefully, Jennifer and Carrie, I see you in other classes as time goes on. Remember, if there's a class you want, send me an email. And if I can put it together, I'll put it together, okay? Or if there's a class on the in my repertoire that you haven't seen in a while and you're waiting for, let me know you want it and I'll put it on for January, February, and March.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Kathy.
you.
Okay, I'm going to
Thank you.
stop recording and then I'll sign off and I'll